Welcome back, everyone, to our afternoon session with Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. We're just waiting for Bhante to come back. It's really wonderful to see all of you coming back online and seeing on the chat box where you're zooming in from. We seem to have quite an international audience here, so thank you so much. We're delighted to have you with us. And just a little announcement, our classes at Dharma College begin in a few weeks, so you're welcome to go online to dharma-college.com to see what we are offering this fall. Again, thank you so much for being with us this weekend, and we will continue next month for a 3-day session during Labor Day weekend. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat box. Richard will be happy to take the questions towards the end of the next session. There are some questions from the first session that we'll try to carry over into the section. And I see that Bhante has arrived. So welcome again, Bhante, to this afternoon session.
Okay. Should we continue?
Yes, please, Bhante.
Okay. So thank you again to everybody for joining for the second session. And so this gets to be a bit technical, but please be patient. It takes time to really learn and understand the technicalities of the Abhidharma. Okay, so at the last session we had, the first session today, we ended with the Javana process during the stages of absorption for attaining the jhanas, and the absorption with the attainment of path and fruit. And that took us to the end of section 14. Now I'm going to be jumping around and going outside the fixed order of this text. So from here, we're going to go to, oh, I don't have the text up. Let me get the text. Okay. And let me, okay, I have to share the screen. Okay, so now we're going to move to section number 21. So this is called the procedure of Javana. Okay, so here the text tells us that in the limited Javana process, the sense sphere, that's a Javana process pertaining to the sense sphere. These sense sphere Javanas run only for usually 7 times. Occasionally, if it's rather weak process, it could be 6 times. But in the case, especially around the time of death, in the Javana processes, when one is about to die, then because the body is weak, and so the Javana process also becomes weak. So on those occasions, it's said that the Javana process will often run only 5 times. We won't be concerned with the Buddha's performance of the miracles. Okay, then within the attainments, that's in the absorption, the Javana and attainments. So this is for a beginner, one who is newly practicing the jhanas. So in the first cognitive process of absorption, the sublime Javana, that would be the Javana culminating in the jhana of the jhana, or the formless absorption, or path. Let's see, it's sublime. So that means the jhana marking the attainment of a jhana, or the attainment of a formless meditation, the formless absorptions. In the first experience of these attainments, the jhana of that attainment will occur only one time, just one split second of jhana, formless meditation. And then comes the dropping back into the bhavanga, the life continuum. In the case of the attainment of the world transcending paths, the path consciousness occurs for only one mind moment. This is a matter of absolute necessity, because the function of the path consciousness is to eradicate defilements, particular group of defilements. And so once the path consciousness performs that function of eradicating these defilements, there's no need for it to occur again. So each path, like the path of stream entry, eradicates the defilements of wrong views and doubt. The path of the once returner weakens greed, hatred, and delusion strong enough to bring a fall, strong enough to bring more than two existences. The path of the non-returner eradicates sensual desire and ill will. And then the path of arhatship eradicates all the any remaining defilements. So the path, once it performs its function, there's no need for the same path to occur again. Then the path will be followed by 2 or 3 Cheetahs of fruition, and then comes the return of the life continuum. We won't deal with the attainment of cessation here. And then this is important. In the cognitive process of the attainments, there is no fixed procedure regarding the processes. It should be understood that even many sublime and supramundane jhanas can take place in immediate succession. So let's see. Yeah, we don't have to be concerned here with the attainment of cessation. Yeah, this is the important point I wanted. So with the attainment of the jhanas and the fruition attainment, this is the fruition corresponding to the 4 paths. Through practice, it's possible to extend the duration of the absorption. And so for the beginner, the attainment occurs for just one jhana moment. But with practice, one could extend the duration of the attainment, increase it to 2, 3, 4 jhanas, while with further mastery, one could even go into the jhana, and the jhana could last for an extremely long period of time, for several hours, even for days. If you go into the first jhana determined for it to last 2 hours, then there'll just be an unbroken succession of jhana cheetahs. Jhana cheetahs occurring in the jhana role, continuing for 2 hours. Okay, now we're going to go backwards. First to number 17, section 17. to see the topic we'll be discussing. So this is the section on the registration citta. But before we take this up, we're going to go back even further to the chapter that we took last month, just to take another look at the Cheetahs that perform the function of registration, just to refresh our memory. Number 19. Oh, number 9, I'm sorry. Okay, so this is the section on the functions of the Cheetahs. And here we have the function of registration. So what are the Cheetahs that perform the function of registration? The total is 11. And these are the 8 great resultants. The 8 great resultants are the sense sphere resultants with roots. To find those, we'd have to go back further to chapter 1. And there you would go to the section on consciousness, on the beautiful consciousness. That would be section number 12, chapter 1, section number 12. And you could see that there are 8 Cheetahs listed there. These are the 8 resultant Cheetahs, actually section number 14, sense sphere resultant Cheetahs with roots. They have either 2 roots, non-greed and non-hatred, or 3 beautiful roots, non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. So those are the 8 great resultants. And then the 3 Cheetahs called investigating consciousness can also perform the function of registration. So the 3 types of investigating consciousness, we have 2 accompanied by neutral feeling, either unwholesome resultant or wholesome resultant. And then on the wholesome resultant side, we have 1 investigating consciousness accompanied by joyful feeling. So those are the 3 types of investigating consciousness that perform the function of registration together with the 8 great resultants. So a total of 11. Let's see if there's anything interesting in the commentary. Yeah, well, it's important to understand when those 3 Cheetahs that are called investigating consciousness perform the function of registration, they're not performing the function of investigation. It's just that it's the same general type of consciousness, but the consciousness has different functions. To use the analogy that I gave last time, this is like the, let's say, the neurosurgeon, Dr. Anderson, who's by profession a neurosurgeon, but in his town, he's also the coach of the town Little League baseball team. So when he's coaching the softball team, he's not functioning as a neurosurgeon. even though people call him, they say Dr. Anderson is the softball coach, but he's not serving as a neurosurgeon when he's coaching the team. At least we hope not. Okay, so that just reviews what are the cheetahs performing the function of registration. Okay, now we come back to the section on registration. Some things here are going to be a little bit weird, but bear with it. Okay, first I'll just look at the text and then we'll look at the explanation. Okay, when an object is undesirable, then the fivefold sense consciousness, if it's a visible form that's considered undesirable, this would be the eye consciousness. If it's a sound, the ear consciousness, and so on. So the sense consciousness, the receiving consciousness, the investigating consciousness, and the registration consciousness are unwholesome resultants. When the object is desirable, they are wholesome resultants. And if the object is extremely desirable, then the investigating consciousness and the registration consciousness are accompanied by joy. If the object is just mildly desirable, the investigation and registration are accompanied by neutral feeling. Now let's see some of the explanation here. And I have to say in advance, this is something I don't quite agree with, but this is what is said in the Abhidharma. So according to the Abhidharma philosophy, but let's first start here. Okay, so sense objects are distinguished into three classes. There's the undesirable, then the moderately, mildly desirable, and then the very desirable objects. There's no distinction amongst the undesirable, whether the object is extremely undesirable or just a little bit undesirable. They're all put under the same heading, the undesirable. But we have this distinction among desirable objects between mildly desirable and very desirable. So maybe that's a touch of optimism in the Abhidharma. Okay, now according to the Abhidharma, this is where, okay, according to the Abhidharma, this distinction in the quality of objects pertains to the very nature of the object itself. It's not determined by the individual, by the personal tastes and preferences of the person, the experiencer. And so this is an Abhidharma commentary, says that if a person considers a desirable object to be undesirable or an undesirable object to be desirable, this is due to some kind of distortion in the perception. But the object itself is intrinsically, inherently desirable or undesirable, independent of one's personal preferences. And so what is the criterion for distinguishing what is inherently desirable and what is inherently undesirable? So this commentary says the distinction depends on the opinion or the feeling of the average person. So it says it's distinguishable according to what is found desirable at one time and undesirable at another time by average. I'm sorry, I put men in brackets, but we would say now today we say people, such as accountants, government officials. I don't know whether I would agree with that today. Burgesses, what are burgesses? These were like small business owners, landowners, and merchants. Yeah, the reason why I find this so questionable, like maybe the Abhidharma commentary written in India or Sri Lanka is thinking, okay, we have a meal of food with a lot of chili peppers and curry powder. So for the Indian person eating that meal, they'll say, wow, this is delicious. And so for them, that's found desirable by the average person there in India. But now you take that really spicy food and give it to an American who's brought up on hamburgers and potatoes and string beans, and he'll take a spoonful of that spicy curry, put it into his mouth and say, wow, this is burning hot. I can't stand it. How could anybody eat this? But he'll be told, this food is intrinsically desirable, but your hamburgers and potatoes and string beans, you give that to the Indian person and he'll say, assuming he's not a vegetarian, he'll take a bite of that and say, how could anybody eat that? Yeah, so it seems to me that this is highly questionable, that there are things intrinsically desirable and intrinsically undesirable. Yeah, I remember, in fact, like when I first went to Sri Lanka and started to eat the Sinhalese food with a lot of spice and curries, it's very, very difficult. Couldn't take it. Now, on the occasions when Sri Lankan people come to this monastery and bring Sri Lankan food with a lot of curries and spices, then I love it. So do we say that the food was, but all along from the Abhidharma perspective, you would have to say the food was intrinsically desirable. Just when I first went to Sri Lanka, I couldn't appreciate it. I had a distortion of perception when I found trouble eating the spicy food. But then after a few years of eating the spicy food, when I got used to it, then I could appreciate the intrinsically desirable food. Anyway, we'll just put that in brackets for now. But here comes an important point, that the object experience provides the opportunity for the karma to ripen. And the way the karma ripens is in the form of the resultant cheetahs, the resultant states of consciousness. And the resultant cheetahs are in a way correlated with the nature of the object, so that if the object is undesirable, let's go down here. So through the force of unwholesome karma, one encounters an undesirable object. So if I encounter like ugly, visible forms, harsh, loud, disagreeable sounds, unpleasant odors, disagreeable food, grating and harsh tactile sensations, I'm encountering those objects through the force of unwholesome karma. And that unwholesome karma is sort of triggering the resultant cheetahs in the cognitive process through which I experience those objects. So the resultant cheetahs that arise in response to these undesirable objects, those are unwholesome resultant cheetahs, which are taking the disagreeable sense data as their objects. So in that case, the sense consciousness, the eye consciousness, ear consciousness, and so on, the receiving consciousness, the investigating consciousness, the registration consciousness are unwholesome resultants. And the accompanying feeling in the case of these cheetahs will be neutral feeling, except in the case of body consciousness, which is accompanied by painful feeling. Okay, in the opposite case, where we have a desirable object, either moderately desirable or very desirable, I encounter those desirable objects through the force or power of wholesome karma. And in that case, the resultant cheetahs in the cognitive process will be generated by the maturing of that wholesome karma. And in that case, the resultant cheetahs in that process will be wholesome resultants, kusala vipaka. So remember, the resultants themselves are not unwholesome, not wholesome, but they are, in one case, the result of unwholesome karma. In this case, the result of wholesome karma. The wholesome karma from the past ripens in the form of the resultants in the positions of sense consciousness, receiving, investigating, and registration. So if there's a moderately desirable object, the cheetahs will be accompanied by, the sense consciousness will be accompanied by neutral feeling, except for body consciousness, which will be accompanied by pleasant feeling. And if it's an extremely desirable object, then the investigating cheetah and the registration cheetah will be accompanied by joyful feeling. Okay, when the object is undesirable, then the function of registration is exercised exclusively by the unwholesome resultant investigating cheetah. But in the case of a moderately, desirable object, then the registration is performed by the wholesome resultant investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity, or by one of the four great resultants accompanied by equanimity. Remember, the four great resultants, those are the beautiful sense sphere resultant cheetahs. I mentioned before there are 8. 4 of them are accompanied by neutral feeling. So those are the ones that are performing the function of registration here. But when the object is very desirable, then registration will be performed by either by the investigating cheetah accompanied by joy, or by one of the 4 great resultants accompanied by joy. Okay, here's a very important point. While the resultant cheetahs, according to the Abhidharma, are determined by the nature of the object, so that disagreeable objects will produce, in the case of disagreeable objects, the resultant cheetahs will be results of unwholesome karma, whereas in the case of agreeable objects, the resultant Cheetahs are the result of wholesome karma. The Javana Cheetahs are not determined by the object, but they are determined by the temperament and the proclivities and by the decision or determination of the person, the experiencer. So it might be the case that an object is extremely desirable, but the jhavanas can occur in the mode of indifference or neutrality. Let me just go back. Okay, so when the object is extremely desirable, the jhavanas may occur in the mode of indifference as wholesome or unwholesome cheetahs accompanied by neutral feeling. For example, the sight of a Buddha is considered, from a Buddha standpoint, considered an extremely desirable sight. It's considered so precious, such a precious event, such an auspicious event to see the form of the Buddha, to meet the Buddha, to see the Buddha. And yet, when we read the suttas, we see many skeptics came to see the Buddha, listen to him teach, and they didn't experience any special joy, but they just had, when they thought about the Buddha, they were full of doubt. And they thought, is he enlightened, not enlightened? We don't know. So their cheetahs were accompanied by neutral feeling. And even there were some, like disciples of the other schools of practice, the non-Buddhist ascetics, when they saw the Buddha, their cheetahs were accompanied by aversion and by painful mental feeling, by hatred and by painful mental feeling, domanassa. And then say, okay, we have a beautiful woman, a young girl, maybe 18 years old, very beautiful. So all ordinary people, when they see her, maybe famous movie actress appears. So many people, men, go to the movies or go get the video to look at that beautiful woman. But if a monk who's developed his meditation on the unattractive nature of the body sees that woman, then he just brings to mind that the body is full of muscles, organs, tissues, fluids, nothing very beautiful there. And so his cheetahs will be accompanied by neutral feeling. And even when the object is undesirable, the jhavanas can occur in the mode appropriate for a desirable object. Here I gave the example of a masochist who enjoys being tormented with painful feeling. And so when they're not being tormented with painful feeling, then they have a craving to experience that painful feeling again. So they have greed for what is considered an undesirable object, while we have a decaying corpse considered a disagreeable object. But if a meditating monk is told, you can go to the cremation ground and you'll see the decaying corpse there, then his mind will be full of joy because he wants to do the meditation on the corpse. Okay, so these are some of the comments made about the registration cheetah and the Javana cheetahs. Here, this is a rather technical point, but I found it somewhat of interest to show how the Abhidhamma formulators try to deal with a certain sort of technical problem that arises in this description of the process of consciousness. This is called the adventitious bhavanga. Okay, so at the end of jhavanas, accompanied by displeasure. Displeasure is painful mental feeling. The registration cheetahs and the life continuum are both accompanied by equanimity. But this doesn't make sense. But this is, okay, this is the important point. Okay, here we have the case of somebody whose rebirth consciousness is accompanied by joy, by joyful feeling, pleasant feeling. Now, if at the end, and now he's going through a jhavana process accompanied by displeasure, that is mental painful feeling, and there's no registration is occurring. So this is what would be called a great cognitive process with a sense object, not the extremely great or process. So there are no registration moments. So in that case, the mind process cannot go directly from the jhavana stage into the bhavanga stage. The reason is because the jhavanas are accompanied by painful feeling, displeasure, and the bhavanga is accompanied by joyful feeling. And there cannot be a direct transition from painful feeling to pleasant feeling, or a direct transition from pleasant feeling to painful feeling. That's explained in the guide. So it said, because pleasant feeling and painful feeling are precise opposites. So cheetahs accompanied by one cannot arise in immediate succession to cheetahs accompanied by the other. So if there's pleasant feeling, it can't be followed immediately by painful feeling. If there's painful feeling, can't be followed immediately by pleasant feeling. So if there's pleasant feeling, then before painful feeling can occur, there must be some cheetahs with neutral feeling. And if there's painful feeling before pleasant feelings can occur, again, there must be some cheetahs accompanied by neutral feeling. And so if the jhavanas are accompanied by displeasure, that is, there'll be cheetahs rooted in hatred or aversion, and the feeling is that of domanassa, mental painful feeling or displeasure. And so if there's no scope for registration cheetahs in that process, then the jhavana cheetahs accompanied by displeasure can be immediately followed by the bhavanga only if the bhavanga is accompanied by neutral feeling. But if the bhavanga is accompanied by one or another of the four great resultants accompanied by joyful feeling, and then there's no registration cheetahs in this jhavana process, then the last jhavana process, or the last jhavana cheetah, cannot be followed immediately by the bhavanga, because in that case you would have painful feeling followed immediately by joyful feeling, because the bhavanga in this case is one accompanied by joyful feeling. So this was something of a problem for the ancient teachers of the Abhidharma. So the solution that they came up with in this in this case, an investigating cheetah accompanied by equanimity occurs for just one mind moment, and it functions as a kind of buffer between the painful mental feeling of the jhana process and the joyful feeling or pleasant mental feeling of the bhavanga state. And so that that investigating cheetah is occurring just for one moment, but not with the function of investigation. It just functions purely as a buffer cheetah. And it takes any kind of odd object, any kind of sense object with which one had already become familiar. And it functions just to smoothen the passage from the jhana process, which is accompanied by painful feeling, to the flow of the bhavanga process, which in this case is accompanied by joyful feeling. So this special cheetah is called the Agantuka Bhavanga. Agantuka is a visitor, an unexpected visitor. So this is the Bhavanga. It's a kind of odd, adventitious Bhavanga. Okay, then there's a certain law governing the registration cheetah, which holds that the registration cheetahs occur only at the end of sense sphere jhanas. They don't occur at the end of fine material sphere, immaterial sphere, or the lokutara, the supramundane jhanas. They occur only to beings in the sense sphere. They don't occur in the fine material realm or immaterial realm. And they occur only when sense sphere phenomena are the objects. Maybe I should just ask if there's any questions here about anything that is unclear before I go further.
Yes, Bhante, there are a couple of questions. If I may, there are four, I think, that directly relevant to this.
Yeah, but I wanted the directly relevant questions.
Okay. The first one is about registration. What does registration actually do? What would a registration entry into the Bhavanga contain? It's not clear what registration is.
Say that again, the last part of the question.
What would a registration entry into the Bhavanga contain? Is it like like if you register a car or something, you register it? I mean, what does it mean, registration?
Yeah. Okay, registration is the English word that some other earlier translators came up with. The actual Pali expression is tad aramana, which you see here, which means simply tad is that, and aramana is object, that object. So it seems that what the registration cheetah does is in a way to sort of emphatically affirm or confirm the object that was the object of the jhavana phase. It sort of, maybe you could say, puts a stamp upon it, so to speak, or it gives a little bit of boost of reinforcement to that object so that the impression of that object remains, I would say, more clearly imprinted upon the ongoing stream of consciousness, which, the way I would understand it, makes it easier for recollection at a subsequent time, or easier to draw upon that object and to use it as a basis for more elaborate acts of cognitive elaboration. That would be my understanding.
So on that basis, the Bhavanga is a bit like memory.
The Bhavanga itself doesn't have the function of remembering, though it would seem that when, after the registration consciousness, it would seem that the impression or the imprint of the object, or the impression of the object, gets imprinted on the Bhavanga. Though strangely, nothing like that is said within the, or at least I've never come across anything like that in the commentaries on the Abhidharma system. But I believe in the Yogacara system that that becomes the function, or one of the functions, of the storehouse consciousness, to preserve sort of the impression of objects as a basis for memory. So I think we could speculate that that would be a function of the Bhavanga, though to my knowledge, it's not said explicitly in the Abhidharma commentaries.
And the final one was, could Bhante please explain one more time the last two paragraphs on page 172?
Yeah, your voice, I think maybe
Sorry,
you're too far from the mic.
Can you please explain can you please explain one more time the last two paragraphs on page 172?
Is it these two paragraphs? Through the force of unwholesome karma and conversely?
Yes, it must be. I think the last two paragraphs.
Yeah, okay. Now your voice much clearer. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, forgive me.
Okay. Okay, so we remember here that the objects, according to the Abhidharma, are intrinsically undesirable and or desirable. Okay, now why do we encounter undesirable objects? So some people, we could say, get exposed to undesirable sights all the time. Say one is living on a dirty street, a lot of garbage piles up, because the garbage is not collected regularly, and people have their radios on loud, and people are yelling and shouting, so you're getting a lot of disturbing noises. And because the garbage is not collected, unpleasant odors are arising, and you don't get to eat out very often, so you have unpleasant food, very ordinary food, not very delectable. Okay, so one is exposed to these objects because of one has unwholesome karma, which has brought you into a situation where you're constantly exposed to undesirable objects. Or even if you're living under good conditions, nice house, in a beautiful neighborhood, you have delicious food and so forth, but you step outside and maybe a dog bites you. So you get painful bodily sensations, or you're walking down the street and somebody just doesn't like the sight of you and they yell something abusive to you. So you get some unpleasant sounds. Okay, so in this case, in the cognitive process, the resultant cheetahs, which are taking the dog bite, the pain of the dog bite as the object, or the abusive words as object, those cheetahs will be arising through the maturation of the unwholesome karma. So those would be unwholesome resultant cheetahs. In this case, let's just take the case, you get bitten by a dog. So there's a bodily consciousness accompanied by painful feeling. There's a receiving consciousness, investigating consciousness, and registration cheetahs. So those are all occurring through the maturation of unwholesome karma. So those are unwholesome resultants. Similarly, somebody yells something abusive, in that case, the ear consciousness and the receiving, investigating, registration are also results of unwholesome karma. So they're unwholesome results. Okay, now the converse case, often you see beautiful sights. Maybe you're living on the high up in a hill where you can look down and you see beautiful view of the valley all the time. And you get to eat very delicious food and you have nice, soft cushions and bedding and so on. So the living conditions represent the maturation or have come about through wholesome karma, the force of wholesome karma. And so the cheetahs that are arising in response to those conditions, whether it's neutral, whether it's moderately desirable objects or very desirable objects. So the cheetahs that are arising through as the resultants of some kind of wholesome karma from the past. It's wholesome past karma that is enabling you to enjoy living under such auspicious or favorable conditions. And that karma is maturing in the form of the wholesome resultants. So you have beautiful view of a sunset in the distance. Maybe you get to listen to some very beautiful music, to eat delicious food. So in that case, the eye consciousness, ear consciousness, tongue consciousness are wholesome resultants. And so too, the receiving, the investigating, and registration cheetahs are the results of wholesome karma. I hope that should make it clear.
It does, Bhante. Thank you. Those are the only questions that were directly related.
Okay. Okay, so now I'll try to finish up, then we could take the remaining questions, including any questions from the previous session. So now we move to section number 24. And this is called analysis by way of individuals. So this is going to show which process cheetahs arise in the mental process of different individuals. And here a distinction is introduced, which will become clearer when we come to section 5. It seems that the text is presupposing that the reader already knows this distinction. But this relates to the cheetah that performs the function of rebirth and bhavanga. And those Cheetahs can be distinguished as of three types: the rootless, double-rooted, and triple-rooted. So these are resultant Cheetahs, which are occurring outside the cognitive process. The three functions outside the cognitive process are rebirth linking, bhavanga, and death. Okay, so the rebirth consciousness, which is also the bhavanga consciousness, can be rootless, which means it doesn't have either beautiful roots or unwholesome roots. And we'll see what, maybe we go directly to the guide. Okay. Okay, so those beings for whom the functions of rebirth, bhavanga, and death are performed. Yeah, we're getting some noise. So I think everybody should be muted. Okay, those beings for whom the functions of rebirth, bhavanga, and death are performed by either of the two types of investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity have a rootless rebirth consciousness. Now, in the case of beings reborn in the lower realms, in the hell realms, the animal realm, or the realm of the ghosts or hungry ghosts, the rebirth consciousness is a rootless consciousness, and the kind of Cheetah that performs that function is the investigating consciousness accompanied by neutral feeling. But it's not performing the function of investigation, but it's performing the function of bhavanga, of rebirth, bhavanga, and bhavanga. For those who are reborn as human beings, but with impaired mental function, so they're not able to, they lack even very basic intelligent functions. People with impaired intelligence, the Cheetah that performs the function of rebirth and bhavanga would be a wholesome, resultant, investigating consciousness. So that consciousness doesn't have any roots, it's rootless, and it's performing the function of rebirth or bhavanga. For somebody of, let's say, moderate intelligence who can perform basic cognitive functions, but without special intelligence or wisdom, they will be reborn with a rebirth consciousness that has two roots. The two roots are non-greed and non-hatred, but they will lack the root of non-delusion, which is also called knowledge or wisdom. So they don't have that, they lack the root of non-delusion or wisdom, it's absent. But they still have basic good dispositions. Of course, they have the roots of non-greed and non-hatred. So that is called a double-rooted rebirth consciousness, which is always the result of wholesome karma. And then the other type of rebirth consciousness is the three-rooted rebirth consciousness, in which there's non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion, or you could say this disposition of wisdom. So for those of us in the sense sphere, if we're reborn with a triple-rooted rebirth consciousness, then our rebirth consciousness will be one of the sense sphere beautiful resultant Cheetahs accompanied by knowledge. And I think if we reach the point where we're studying the Abhidharma, we could congratulate ourselves that we probably have a rebirth and Bhavanga Cheetah accompanied by the root of non-delusion, the seed of wisdom. Okay, so now we come back. First, let's take the text, then I'll come to the explanation. So for those with a double-rooted rebirth consciousness or a rootless rebirth consciousness, functional jhavanas, these would be the jhavanas of an arhat, and absorption jhavanas do not arise. Okay, to achieve arhatship, you need, or to attain really any paths or fruits, one needs a triple-rooted rebirth consciousness. If you're reborn in the human realm, but you have a rootless rebirth consciousness or a two-rooted rebirth consciousness, you can't attain arhatship in that life, and you can't attain any paths or fruits, and you can't attain even the jhanas or the insight knowledges. For that, we need a three-rooted rebirth consciousness. And also for those with a double-rooted or rootless rebirth consciousness in the fortunate realms, in the human realm, or even in the lower heavenly realms, resultants accompanied by knowledge do not arise. But in the lower planes of existence, the great resultants dissociated from knowledge are not found. Let's try to get the explanation of this. Okay, so in the blissful, what's meant by the blissful plane is the human world and the sense sphere heavenly realms. If one is reborn with a rebirth consciousness with either rootless or with two roots, devoid of the root of wisdom, because one lacks, the rebirth consciousness lacks that disposition towards wisdom, the triple-rooted great resultants do not arise in the role of registration. For these beings, the registration cheetahs will be only rootless, that is the investigating cheetahs, or two-rooted sense sphere great resultants with non-greed and non-hatred. But in the lower worlds, the hells, the animal realm, the realm of ghosts, the rebirth consciousness is always the rootless investigating cheetah. So there, in the role of registration, even a two-rooted resultant will not occur, performing the function of registration. There, only the rootless resultants can perform the function of registration. Because the rebirth consciousness, because it lacks roots, and so it's not strong enough to serve as the base for a registration consciousness that has even two roots. Okay, now for those with a three-rooted rebirth consciousness. So here the rebirth consciousness has non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. Okay, first in the case of arhats, wholesome and unwholesome jhavanas don't arise. For them, all of the jhavanas are called functional, or kriya jhavanas. You can see this if you go back to chapter 1. Okay, for trainees, that is disciples at the stage of stream enterer, once returner, non-returner, and worldlings, ordinary people who have not reached any noble attainment, the functional jhavanas don't arise, because the functional jhavanas occur only to the arhats. Okay, now in trainees, again, these are the disciples from the stage, at the stage of stream enterer, once returner, non-returner. The jhavanas associated with wrong view and with doubt do not arise. Why don't they arise? Because with the attainment of the path of stream entry, wrong view and doubt are permanently eradicated. So in that case, from stream entry, from the stream enterer up higher, Cheetahs accompanied by wrong view or by doubt never occur again. The stream enterer is completely free from wrong view and doubt, and from Cheetahs accompanied by wrong view and doubt. And similarly, for disciples at the stage of once returning, they also will never give rise to wrong view or doubt. Okay, now we come at the third stage of enlightenment. That's called the stage of the non-returner. So the non-returner permanently eradicates sensual desire and ill will or aversion. And so the non-returner can never experience jhavanas associated with aversion. But the non-returner, they don't have sensual craving, but they still have the attachment to existence. And so they will still have Cheetahs accompanied by greed. They've not yet eliminated Cheetahs. They've not yet eliminated greed. And the arhats, it's not mentioned here, but the arhats will never experience in the jhavana phase any, well, it's already mentioned. In the jhavana phase, the arhats will never experience any unwholesome jhavanas, any unwholesome Cheetahs. Greed, hatred, delusion, and everything connected with greed, hatred, and delusion have been permanently eradicated by the arhat. And then the supramundane jhavanas are experienced only by the noble ones according to their respective capacities. And so this means that the one who attains the jhavana process of attainment stream entry will experience the path of stream entry and the fruit of stream entry. The one who attains the path and fruit, the one who attains the jhavana process for reaching the stage of once returner will experience the path and the fruit Cheetahs in the jhavana stage of the once returner. Similarly for the non-returner and for the stage of attaining arhatship. But once a person attains one of the four noble stages, they can enter into a special meditative absorption in which they experience for a continuing period of time the fruition Cheetahs of that stage. So say we have a stream enterer. They want to enter the fruition attainment of stream entry for 1 hour. So they sit down, cross their legs, they make the determination, let me enter the fruition attainment of stream entry for 1 hour. Then they will be experiencing super mundane jhavanas for 1 hour And those supramundane jhavanas will be the fruit of stream entry cheetahs occurring continuously for 1 hour. Similarly, a once returner wants to enter the fruit of once returning for 1 hour. They can make that determination. And then for 1 hour, there will be a succession of fruition cheetahs, supramundane cheetahs occurring in the jhavana phase. And similarly for the non-returner, for the arhat. Yeah, I'll come to the cheetahs later when we come to the table, but let's do the next section, which is called analysis by way of planes. And this section will allocate particular, will explain what cheetahs occur, or what kind of cognitive processes occur in which planes of existence, in the different planes of existence. So in the sense sphere plane, all the different cognitive processes are capable of occurring. And this would be in the fortunate realms of the sense sphere plane. Let's say the human plane for human beings. So for human beings, we can have any of the types of unwholesome cognitive processes, those governed by greed, by hatred, by ignorance. We can have the ordinary sense sphere cheetahs, the beautiful, wholesome sense sphere cheetahs of the sensual plane, or we could go into the jhanas, in which case we're experiencing fine material plane cognitive processes. If we advance still further in the power of samadhi, we could be experiencing the immaterial sphere jhavana processes. Or if we attain the supramundane attainments, we could be experiencing the supramundane cognitive processes. So all of those cognitive processes are available to human beings. And probably, I would say, my guess is to the devas in the lower heavenly worlds. That is my guess. Okay, in the fine material sphere plane, this is the plane of existence corresponding to the jhanas. All of these occur with the exception of jhavanas connected with aversion. Aversion means hatred or ill will. So the beings existing in the fine material plane of existence, that is, the beings who have attained the jhanas as human beings and then been reborn there through the force of their jhana attainments, they will not experience in the fine material sphere any ill will, aversion, or hatred. And also they don't experience registration. Remember, the registration occurs only in the sense sphere plane. We'll come back to this later. In the immaterial sphere plane, all of these occur with the further exception of the first path. The first path is the path of stream entry. The reason the first path, the path of stream entry, doesn't occur in the immaterial plane of existence is because to attain stream entry, one of the conditions is learning the Dharma, hearing teachings of the Dharma. And to hear the Dharma, what do you need? Ears. If you don't have ears, you can't hear the Dhamma. And the beings in the immaterial plane of existence don't have physical bodies. No physical bodies, no ear, no ability to hear the Dhamma. So they can't attain the first path there. And for some reason, they don't attain fine material sphere consciousness. And they don't attain those in a higher plane of existence in the immaterial sphere won't enter the meditative absorptions of the lower immaterial planes. Probably because in the immaterial sphere, so they're enjoying this peace and tranquility of the immaterial sphere jhanas, and so they won't want to go down and experience the fine material sphere type of consciousness, which is a coarser kind of consciousness. And if they're in a higher immaterial sphere, like say they've reached the base of nothingness, then they won't have any desire to attain the base of infinite space or the base of infinite consciousness. So those cheetahs won't occur. And then the smiling consciousness certainly won't occur in the immaterial sphere. And why won't the smiling consciousness occur in the immaterial sphere?
No form.
Right. If you're going to smile, how do you smile? You need a body to smile. Without a mouth to smile, you can't smile. And so why should there be a smiling consciousness? It would be useless. It would be like maybe somebody in the early 20th century who's bought a car, first time has a car. He used to travel around with a carriage pulled by horses, and he would have a whip to move the horses. But now he has a car, he's not going to take his horsewhip into the car because he doesn't need it anymore. And so in the immaterial sphere, you don't have a body, and so there's no use for a smiling consciousness. Okay, let's see if the guide says anything more that's of interest. Okay, so this is referring now to planes of existence, not planes of consciousness. So in the fine material plane, the cheetahs connected with aversion or ill will don't occur because aversion was well suppressed in the preliminary training for attaining the jhana. And also the registration cheetahs don't occur in the fine material plane because the registration cheetahs occur only to beings in the sense sphere plane. And in the immaterial plane as well, aversion and the registration don't occur. Smiling cannot occur without a physical body, so it doesn't occur in the immaterial plane. And those reborn into any immaterial plane don't attain the fine material sphere jhanas or the lower immaterial sphere jhanas. Okay, then for those who are devoid of particular sense organs, the cognitive processes connected with those corresponding doors don't arise. So say if somebody is born blind, then they won't have an eye door cognitive process. Somebody is born deaf, they won't have an ear door cognitive process. And it's said that in the fine material plane, the beings who are dwelling there lack the senses of smell, taste, and touch, because those are considered coarse, gross types of sense experience. And so in the fine material plane, it said the beings have only sight and hearing, no smell, taste, and touch. Most of the time, I guess, the fine material beings, they spend most of their time absorbed in the bliss of the jhanas, but they do come out, and according to these texts, and they can meet with each other, have conversations with each other, and sometimes the Buddha or the Arhats visit the fine material plane and have conversations with the beings in the fine material plane. And sometimes the beings from that plane will come down, will appear in the human realm and have conversations with the Buddha, with the Arhats. Maybe they could also appear to non-Buddhist yogis. Like I said, some of the Hindu yogis will have visions of Mahabrahma. Okay, all that remains now to get a total picture. There's a table that shows which cheetahs occur in which planes. Okay, this, I'm going to increase the size. Okay, so this is a comprehensive table showing individual types, planes of existence, and which cheetahs occur. It's rather technical, but let us go through it. Okay, so this is for those reborn in the woeful plane of existence. The woeful plane, again, it's the three lower realms, the hells, the animal realm, and the realm of the ghosts, the hungry ghosts. So, and their rebirth consciousness is rootless. It's that investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity, but performing the function of rebirth and bhavanga. So these beings can experience any of the 12 unwholesome cheetahs, or the 8 wholesome sense sphere cheetahs. In the Javana phase, they'll experience either 12 or 8. And then they also experience 17 rootless cheetahs. So what are these 17 rootless cheetahs? It will be any of the rootless cheetahs except the smiling consciousness of the Arhat. Let's go back to the rootless cheetahs. Just to refresh our memory. So these are the rootless cheetahs. There's 18 rootless cheetahs. So we have 7 unwholesome resultants. So we have eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body consciousness, unwholesome resultants. We have receiving consciousness, and then we have the investigating consciousness, unwholesome resultant. So that's 7. Then we have wholesome resultants. Those would be 8. We have the 5 types of sense consciousness, the receiving consciousness, but then we have 2 types of investigating, one accompanied by joyful feeling, the other by neutral feeling. And so those are 15 types of rootless cheetahs. Then we have 2 that are functional that could occur to ordinary beings. One is the 5-door adverting, and the other is the mind door adverting, which also performs the function of determining in the sense process. So those are the 17. And the one that doesn't occur is that rather mysterious smiling cheetah of the Arhat. So that one occurs only for Arhats. So we have altogether 37 cheetahs can occur to the beings in the woeful states of existence. Okay, now we have beings in what are called the blissful or fortunate realms of existence. These would be human beings and beings in the lower heavenly realms, the 6 heavenly realms. These could be reborn with a rootless rebirth consciousness, but for them, that will be the wholesome resultant investigating consciousness. So there are no roots, no beautiful roots, but it's a result of some kind of good karma, but it's a weak good karma. So these beings can experience the 12 unwholesome cheetahs, the 17 rootless cheetahs, the 8 wholesome cheetahs, and they can also experience the 4 beautiful resultant cheetahs dissociated from knowledge with the function of registration, because it is these 4 beautiful resultant cheetahs can also perform the function of registration. So we have 41 cheetahs in the case of these beings. Okay, in the case of the beings reborn in the happy realms with a double-rooted rebirth consciousness, for them the same types of cheetahs can occur. And notice that the beings in the woeful planes, in the fortunate realms, with the rootless rebirth consciousness and the double-rooted rebirth consciousness, all of their cheetahs are sense sphere cheetahs. No fine material plane, no immaterial plane cheetahs, and no world transcending cheetahs. But now we have beings who are reborn with a triple-rooted rebirth consciousness, which also functions as their Bhavanga cheetah. And now we take the case of worldlings, those who have not reached any stage of enlightenment. So they can have all of the above cheetahs, and they can also have the 4 beautiful resultant cheetahs associated with knowledge with the function of registration. And they can also have the 9 types of sublime cheetahs. What are the 9 sublime cheetahs? That would be the 5 levels of jhana, the cheetahs occurring at the 5 levels of jhana, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. and the Cheetahs occurring at the level of the immaterial attainments, the base of infinite space, base of infinite consciousness, base of nothingness, base of neither perception nor non-perception. So for the triple root, for the worldling in the sense sphere with the three-rooted rebirth Bhavanga Cheetah, all of these Cheetahs occur. Now for a triple-rooted worldling existing not in the sense sphere plane, but now reborn in the fine material plane at the level of the jhanic absorptions. For them, there will be only 10 unwholesome Cheetahs can occur in the Javana phase. 2 are missing. What are the 2 that are missing? The 2 accompanied by aversion or ill will. 1 is prompted, 1 is unprompted. So that is missing. Then 6 rootless Cheetahs are missing. What are the 6 rootless Cheetahs that are missing? It will be the nose, tongue, and body Cheetahs, which can be unwholesome resultants or wholesome resultants. Those will be absent. Wait, so that's 6. Wait. Yes, so those 6 rootless Cheetahs are missing. And what's missing are the wait.
And there should be 7 rootless Cheetah, including 2 body.
Say again.
I'm thinking, 6 rootless Cheetah. Oh,
Yeah, they won't have.
I remember there.
Oh, of course. I'm sorry. They have 11. I was trying to think under the terms that they're missing 11. No, they have 11. So they're just missing 6. They're missing those 6. Nose, tongue, body, unwholesome resultants. Nose, tongue, body, wholesome resultants. And of course, since they're worldlings, they don't have the smiling consciousness. So they have 11 rootless Cheetahs. I got a little confused for a moment. Okay, they have the 8 sense sphere wholesome Cheetahs. They have the 9 sublime Cheetahs. That's the 5 of the jhanas, the 4 material Cheetahs. And 5 sublime resultants. That is, if they're reborn at the level of the first jhana, then they have the first jhana resultant Cheetah. If they're reborn at the level of the second jhana, they have the second jhana resultant Cheetah, and so on, up to the 5th jhana. If they're reborn at that level, they have the 5th jhana resultant Cheetah. Okay, then 3-rooted worldlings in the immaterial plane have 10 unwholesome Cheetahs minus the 2 with aversion. They have mind door adverting amongst the rootless Cheetahs. They don't have any of the other rootless Cheetahs because they don't have any sense faculties. They have 8 wholesome Cheetahs, 8 wholesome sense sphere Cheetahs, And they have 4 sublime wholesome cheetahs. That is the cheetah of their level of attainment and the 4 sublime resultants. The resultant cheetah that forms their rebirth and Bhavanga cheetah. I'm going to skip over these. Others, I want to leave time for questions. Just will come to the Arhat, see what the Arhat has. So the Arhat has all 18 resultants. Here we're in the sense sphere. Beings in the sense sphere, they have all 18 resultants. Because even Arhats can experience the results of unwholesome karma, though they don't create any unwholesome karma. Okay, they will have the 8 sense sphere beautiful functional cheetahs. They're not wholesome, but functional. They'll have the sense sphere beautiful 8 sense sphere beautiful resultant cheetahs and the 9 sublime functional cheetahs, since Arhats can attain the 5 jhanas or the 4 immaterial attainments. And then they will have the special fruition cheetah of the Arhatship. When they enter the meditative absorption in the fruit of Arhatship, then this cheetah will occur. Maybe this is enough. Let us just take questions. If you really want to get into the details, you can look this up on your own, and I think there'll be explanations, but maybe more interesting to take questions.
Thank you, Bhante. Am I clear? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I could hear you.
So we had some questions from this morning, which I suppose we should deal with now, and then we'll get on to this section. So does access concentration fulfill the criteria of samadhi in the 8 Noble Path?
From the standpoint of the commentarial system, yes.
Okay. The second one is, when the jhana of absorption first occurs, does its mental object change?
You mean, I guess the person means, does the object change from those preliminary cheetahs like preparation?
Yes, I think that's right.
Access, conformity, and change of lineage to absorption. No, it's the same object. So say if one has been doing mindfulness of breathing, then the object that appears to those cheetahs is called the counterpart sign, say a bright luminous disk. So that will be the object of those preliminary cheetahs, and it is also the object of the jhana cheetah.
Right. Third one is the mind moment when one is able to see phenomena passing by very quickly. Does that mark the attainment of path and fruit? Does the concept of time in an awakened being different from an ordinary being?
It seems there's 2 questions there.
There are, yeah.
Okay, so the first question, does the ability to see the cheetahs arising and passing quickly,
Yeah.
does that mark the attainment of path and fruit?
Yes.
No, that would be just cheetahs occurring, sense sphere cheetahs occurring in the process of developing insight on impermanence. So one is seeing the rising and passing of conditioned phenomena. But what happens when the contemplation of impermanence or dukkha or anatta, when it reaches the peak or the deepest level, then the transition to the path and fruit takes place. And the path and fruit take as their object, not the changing phenomena, but they take nibbana as their object.
Yes. Thank you, Bhante. Does the concept of time in an awakened being different from that of an ordinary being? How long is this mind moment? How long does it last?
Let me say that the experience of time has changed for me from the time I was 20 years old to the time I am now. Back in those days, it seemed the year went by so slowly. A day went by so slowly. And now we're in the summer and I'm thinking to get my winter coat ready. So I would imagine that for an arhat, the sense of time is very, very different from the sense of time for an ordinary person.
Thank you, Bhante.
Yeah, especially since an arhat maybe, particularly if they're able to gain access to other realms of existence with the divine eye, so they could see completely different rates at which time goes by. And when they come back to the human realm, I guess the sense of time changes very, very remarkably.
There's a question here about dreams. The process of awareness, the mind trying to make sense of dreams during dreams, is that the same as the mind door process?
I would guess that if in a dream one is trying to make sense of a dream, it would have to be a mind door process, because in a dream, the sense doors are not functioning. So it's purely, a dream is purely a mind door process. Even though you might seem to be seeing things, hearing things, and so on, but since the actual sense faculties are not functioning in the dream, it's necessarily a mind door process.
Okay, Bhante. And then there's a question here: how do memories arise in mind without any connection to the five sense objects?
How do memories arise without any connection to the five senses?
Yeah, it seems a strange question.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, let's leave that one. And then I've got a technical one here. Does the Gandhabba at the time of rebirth have any bhavanga or cheetah? Does the term Gandhabba mean anything? I'm unfamiliar with it.
Yeah, okay. This is referring to the sutta that occurs in the Majjhima Nikaya, sutta number 38, and also another sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. I don't remember the number, it's later, somewhere in the 90s, where the Buddha speaks about 3 conditions for rebirth to occur. The 3 conditions are, first, the potential parents have to have sexual relationship, a sexual union, and then the mother has to be in the fertile season for the woman. So those are the 2 which are familiar to us empirically. Then the 3rd condition mentioned is that the Gandhabba has to be present. And then there's a question, what is meant by the Gandhabba? And there are different interpretations of that. So my interpretation is a bit of a puzzle or problem for, I would say, for the Theravada and Abhidharma system, which holds that the rebirth consciousness arises immediately after the death consciousness from the previous life. So the Gandhabba seems to be a being in a somewhat semi-material state, almost like a spirit being, which is coming over from a person or a being that has passed away earlier and is waiting for the opportunity for the right karmic conditions to occur for that being to take rebirth. And so the way I would understand it, the Gandhabba does have a bhavanga and functioning sense doors consciousness and mind door consciousness, in my understanding.
Thank you, Bhante. And then there's a related question, which I think you've answered, but let's see. What happens to the bhavanga when we die?
Again, this is difference of a, but let me sort of skirt this question by saying that that is a question that will be relevant to chapter 5. In fact, it will be dealt with at length in chapter 5. So if you want to find out, please tune in next month for the Abhidharma program.
Then I've got a question here. What happens if there's a wholesome Javana cheetah, but the bhavanga is of displeasure? Will there be a guest registration cheetah?
Yeah, interesting question. But the answer is that the bhavanga cannot be accompanied by displeasure, because displeasure occurs. Displeasure is another term for painful mental feeling. Not painful physical feeling, but painful mental feeling. And according to the Abhidharma, painful mental feeling occurs only in the cheetahs accompanied by aversion, ill will, or hatred. And those cheetahs occur only in the Javana phase, not in the bhavanga phase.
Yes. Thank you. And then I think there's a related question here. It says, if you were shouted at with angry words and your mind didn't react, but after a while the mind registered and started to label them as offensive,
Yeah.
Could you explain why the mind wouldn't register that at the time when you were shouted at? Like a sort of shock kind of situation.
Interesting question. And we don't have to take only the case of abusive speech, but let's say you're walking down the street and then there's just a vague sense of a sound, like somebody calling, like a human voice. And then you walk a few, maybe further down to the end of the street, then suddenly you realize somebody was calling my name.
Yeah.
And then you turn around. When you heard the sound, you didn't identify it as your name, but somehow when you get to the end of the street, you realize that was your name being called. It'd be interesting. How do you explain that in terms of the cognitive process? The way I would just have to conjecture an explanation. What happened during the phase of the direct ear consciousness, that there was the hearing, there was some javana process taking in the sound, and a registration which registered the sound, and it deposited that impression of the sound into the bhavanga. But then as one continued walking down, somehow the imprint of the sound popped up from the bhavanga, was slipped up into the mind consciousness. Through the bhavanga is the mind door, remember? Mm-hmm. So that impression of the sound slipped through the bhavanga and came through the mind door into mind consciousness. And then the mind consciousness again latched onto that sound again, and then was able to identify it and distinguish it as my name.
Yeah.
And if the person was, okay, coming back to the question's original example, if the person was not shouting your name in a friendly way, but saying, you dirty so-and-so. Okay, so then when the name pops back into the mind and you identify my name, you also identify the abusive words that were spoken. And then you recognize that person was cursing me or abusing me. And then in response, maybe there will come javana processes dominated by ill will or aversion. And then you turn around and look to see who is calling your name and abusing you. And then you might give rise to states, to javana processes dominated by aversion. And then you abuse that person in return. Or if you're a Buddhist practitioner, able to maintain your practice, then you turn around and you look at the person and you generate thoughts of loving kindness. May you be well, may you be happy, may you get over your anger and ill will. And then that person feels sees your beautiful smile and your beautiful, feels your beautiful vibrations of loving kindness, and then apologizes for the abusive words.
What a beautiful world you live in, Bhante.
I gave two alternatives. I didn't say but one.
So, I mean, but the difference is, of course, if in not hearing your name called and then recognizing it was your name and someone screaming at you,
Yeah.
of course, in the second circumstance, it's it seems like a sort of shock kind of reaction. Almost.
Yeah.
Okay, there's another question here. For an animal that can get rebirth as a human being, does it have to have a double-rooted rebirth consciousness?
Again, I believe that question will come up in chapter 5. I haven't refreshed my memory of the sequence of rebirths, but I think if an animal gets reborn as a human being, I believe it would have to have at best a double-rooted rebirth consciousness.
Right.
But I'm not sure. I'd have to look again at the details of chapter 5. So when I prepare for next month's session, then I will have the answer to that on my fingertips.
Thank you, Bhante. And then there's a related question. What happens to a deva that's reborn in the human realm? Is she or he only have two rooted as well, or what happens there?
I think the general rule is that if the deva comes down from the sense sphere deva worlds back to the human realm, I believe that they'll have probably primarily 3-rooted rebirth cheetahs, but possibly double-rooted rebirth cheetahs. But if a being from the fine material or immaterial realm passes away from those realms and comes to the human realm, then they will necessarily have a 3-rooted rebirth consciousness, because those are very powerful types of wholesome consciousness.
Okay. Thank you, Bhante. And then there's a question here about the eradication. How can permanent eradication of factors such as wrong views or doubt occur? Is this because these unwholesome elements arise from prior karma in worldlings and that karma is exhausted? Or is there another mechanism?
That's just the special, say, force or power of these world transcending or supramundane cheetahs. That is their special function.
I see.
It's not coming about from past karma, though past karma will provide supporting conditions for those path cheetahs to arise. But once the path cheetah arises, because let's say that those unwholesome cheetahs are all rooted, the most fundamental root is ignorance, avidya, and the path cheetahs penetrate into the truth, the ultimate truth. And so they cut the root of ignorance. And when they cut the root of ignorance, they cut the cheetahs that are rooted in ignorance. But they can't cut the root of ignorance all at once. But that happens very, very rarely. But usually the normal process is they have to give 4 cuts to the root of ignorance. And with each cut, certain defilements fall away until with the 4th cut, then whatever defilements remain, those are eliminated. That is the cut of arhatship, the path of arhatship.
Thank you, Bhante. Then there's a question here. Some people report the experience of cessation with path consciousness of stream entry.
Yeah.
Is this different from Nirodha, cessation after the 5th immaterial jhana? Is this discussed anywhere?
Yeah, sometimes I've seen in reports about people who have experience of path and fruit, they call that an experience of cessation. But the object of path and fruit cheetahs, they're cheetahs, states of consciousness which have their object. Their object is nibbana. And because nibbana is transcendent to all conditioned phenomena. It's unconditioned. So probably because it's the opposite of everything which they've been previously acquainted with, they call it cessation, but it's not complete absence. But there is a special meditative attainment available to certain non-returners and arhats called Nirodha Samapatti, the meditative attainment of cessation, in which the stream of consciousness is temporarily stopped. And that will be taken up when we come to chapter 9, the last chapter.
Thank you, Bhante. And then there's a related question. How can the fruition of stream entry be described from a phenomenological standpoint?
What's a phenomenological standpoint?
I thought you might say that. Okay. Obviously, if you're not familiar with phenomenology, perhaps we'll pass on that question, or perhaps it could be asked another way. Which sense door does smiling arise through? The smiling cheetah.
Okay, actually, yeah. Okay. I should have explained that what's called the smile-producing cheetah, this rootless cheetah, is a kind of cheetah that's special to the arhat. It is said to be the cheetah because through which arhats smile without an apparent reason about ordinary phenomena. But it is not the only cheetah that produces smiling. Somewhere in this manual, it explains that the act of smiling can be produced by unwholesome cheetahs rooted in greed, because when people obtain the object of greed, then they're happy and they smile. Or it can be produced by wholesome cheetahs. The smiling is produced by cheetahs rooted in greed, accompanied by joy. So when people obtain the objects of their craving, of their greed, then they enjoy the object, and so they smile. And smiling can also be produced by the sense sphere wholesome cheetahs, accompanied by joy. So there's 4 wholesome sense sphere cheetahs, beautiful cheetahs, accompanied by joy, and also by the sense sphere functional, beautiful cheetahs of an arhat, accompanied by joy. So we have 4 unwholesome, those rooted in greed, 4 wholesome, 4 beautiful wholesome cheetahs, and 4 beautiful functional cheetahs, and the smile producing cheetah of the arhat. So I think that's 13 cheetahs that produce the smiling.
Thank you, Bhante. I can ask the previous question again now. How can the fruition of stream entry be described from an experiential standpoint?
Yeah, I guess it's very hard to describe from an experiential standpoint because it's a cheetah that has the unconditioned nibbana as its object. And so it's very difficult to describe, I guess, because it takes as its object something which is entirely different from all conditioned phenomena with which we are acquainted.
Okay, thank you, Bhante.
But in terms of its accompanied feeling, it could be described as either blissful, that is, if it's accompanied by joyful feeling, or as extremely peaceful, if it's accompanied by the feeling of equanimity. So in terms of its feeling, it can be described.
Would you say it was non-conceptual? That's a term that sometimes people use.
I would say it's non-conceptual. So when one emerges from it, one could try to use one would use concepts to try to explain it to oneself or explain it to others. Again, by saying it's blissful, peaceful, tranquil, sublime, excellent, wonderful, and so on.
Thank you, Bhante. We're living in the Buddhasasana and are hearing the Dhamma as well. What additional requisites are needed for the Sotapanna stage of stream entry?
Okay, the sutta texts speak about 4 factors that are conducive to the attainment of stream entry. So the 4 factors are, one is associating with good people, with learned people, people who are knowledgeable about the Dharma and who exemplify wonderful qualities, excellent moral and spiritual qualities. So associating with good people. The second factor contributing as a support for stream entry is listening to the Dharma, hearing the good Dharma. So through listening, one gains the exposure to the principles that one has to understand through stream entry and the practices one has to undertake to reach it. So that's the second factor. The third factor is called Yoniso Manasikara, which might be translated as wise reflection or thorough examination. So this is after you listen to the Dharma, then you reflect upon it, examine it, turn it over in one's mind in order to gain what's called the wisdom that arises through reflection. But that's still not enough. One needs experiential wisdom. And so that leads to the fourth factor for stream entry, which is correct practice, practicing in accordance with the Dhamma, which means in effect developing samatha and vipassana, tranquility and insight.
Thank you, Bhante. Animals on Earth are non-percipient beings with no cognitive process. Is that correct according to the manual?
Say again.
Does the manual describe animals as non-percipient beings with no cognitive processes?
No, no. Animals are percipient beings. They're sentient beings, and they're beings in the what's called one of the woeful states. They have cognitive processes, mainly, probably most of the time, unwholesome cheetahs, because they're driven mainly by greed, fear, and aversion. Occasionally, animals probably have wholesome cheetahs, but they're certainly percipient. The non-percipient beings, I didn't bring that up because it's a very special case. It's one of the subdivisions of the fine material plane, consists of beings who have only material bodies, but no consciousness, no mental processes. And it's said that this is the plane for beings when they were human beings. They became yogis, meditators, maybe ascetics, and they thought that to be conscious is miserable and afflicted with suffering. And so they practiced meditation with the aim of eliminating consciousness. And so there was apparently a technique of meditation toward an ancient India for separating mind and body. And so through practicing that meditation, they were reborn into this plane so that they have material bodies, but no consciousness. And this lifespan here, or existence here, has a specified lifespan. And so when the being comes to the end of that lifespan, they pass away, and then the stream of consciousness starts again where it left off when they were reborn there.
Thank you, Bhante. Then there's one last question. Is it correct those born with 2-rooted rebirth consciousness won't be able to attain the jhana states in this life?
Yeah, that's what I said. That
Yeah.
They can't attain the jhanas or the insight knowledges or the paths and fruits. But even if they have 2 good roots, they could still do wholesome cheetahs, do wholesome deeds, meritorious deeds, and then they dedicate the merit to reaching the higher attainments, or even they can make the effort maybe to practice meditation in the hope of attaining jhana. So even if they don't attain now, but through that effort, they're creating the conditions for gaining a triple-rooted rebirth consciousness in the future.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Bhante. That's all the questions, and I'll hand back to Wang Mo.
Thank you all again. We've just had a wonderful day again of Dhamma with our precious Venerable Bhante Bhikkhu Bodhi. Just to remind you all, we will be continuing next month. Special Bhante has given 3 days of his time during the Labor Day, which falls on September 4th, 5th, and 6th. And during that weekend, Bhante will be going over chapter 5 and 6 from the compendium. We will also be sending out this recording in about 1 week. If you could give us just about a week for us to complete the recording, we will send it to all of you by email. Registration is still open, so if you have friends who would like to join the remaining months, all are welcome to join. And we'd like to also mention that this Abhidharma course is being conducted in partnership with the Buddhist Association of the United States. Based at Chong Yen Monastery in upstate New York, BAUS is dedicated to promoting a broad view of the Buddhist teachings in the US and offers programs by esteemed teachers of different Buddhist traditions. We also have heard in the chat box that Bhante does give a metta meditation on Wednesday evening. So you could find out more information by going to BAUS Monastery. Again, thank you to all dear friends in Dharma for being with us on this Saturday. And may we dedicate all the good deeds that we've done today, especially to Bhante's long life and to good health, for you to share in the Dhamma and letting us open our minds to understanding more of these precious teachings. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. And thanks to Dharma College for hosting this program. And thanks to everybody in the audience for listening.